So I understand that it's actually just going to be a fireside chat between myself and Lord Clement Jones. I can't actually. We will really spend hours if I had to go through your CV. But actually, if I may say, Tim is actually a friend and colleague for many years. Tim, actually, the deep tech dispute resolution lab that I set up at the University of Oxford a few years ago. Tim is actually on the advisory board of that lab, and as you know, he's in the House of Lords and formerly had a very distinguished career in law. And very involved the last few years in AI and policy in the UK. So it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to really delve deeper into the role of government policy, regulation, broadly defined, and also the role of ethics when it comes to regulating AI. Very pleased that you're able to join me, Tim. Thank you.
Great to see you, Mimi. And I'm going to start off with congratulations, because only a few months ago you were appointed to the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation Advisory Board. So I think you've had to come up, to speed quite heavily with UK policy on ethical regulation. Because the CDI are relying on you to give them some good advice.
Yeah, no, it's a great centre. It advises as you know, the Department of Digital Media, Communications and Sports. It's a great centre that's doing lots of interesting projects, which we won't have time to go into. But today, I think what will be really wonderful is to get really into some of the kind of initiatives that have developed on kind of regulating AI from different parts of the world. Obviously, let's focus on the UK. So the audience here are business leaders from diverse sectors. We had some very interesting panels yesterday on technology. And so, obviously, this is a topic that is, there's many conferences on this, but I think it would be great to, look at how it's relevant for the business community, the role of government policy, regulation, and ethics in this fast-moving area. So maybe I'll just kick off and actually ask you just for a basic definition of AI, and what are some of the kind of opportunities, particularly from a business point of view?
Well, I think the easiest definition, it starts off with a familiar product, if you like. Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, I think has boiled it down very, very well. He calls it software that learns from experience. Now, you can add bells and whistles to that definition, but the essence of it is the autonomous nature of AI. And, there are various forms of algorithm and so on and so forth, which are not as autonomous as AI, and therefore, in a sense, this is quite a good way of defining it. And of course, the very act of learning from experience predicates that you're learning from existing data. Now, you can synthesize data, but by and large, what AI brings on board with it are all the issues to do with historic data, biased data, and so on. So that's why people start having to think very carefully, A, about the autonomy, and B, about the data use, basically.
Yeah, so there are obviously opportunities with this new technology. If you want to just run through some of these opportunities and maybe some of the challenges that we're faced with at the moment. Yeah.
Well, I think, for me, I think AI has fantastic opportunities because the analytical, predictive nature of AI is incredibly powerful. We were talking earlier in the sessions about quantum computing. Well, even where we've got to with the computing power, AI in its analytical form is amazingly powerful. One of the reasons why it's taken so long, after all, the term artificial intelligence was invented in the 1950s
that's right.
By John McCarthy. One of the reasons why it didn't really take off, and we had these AI winters, was the lack of computing power. Well, even without quantum computing, we've got the power to predict. For instance, some of the sustainable development goals can be solved by artificial artificial intelligence means by prediction, analysis, and so on. Agriculture, has already got some fantastic applications in this area. But really, because it's very varied in terms of natural language processing,
Yeah.
for instance, fraud detection
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
A lot of that, as you know, through your institute, a lot of that can be done by AI. AI, I mean, one of the big controversial areas is live facial recognition.
Yeah.
So the biometric aspect of AI is very important. So actually, almost everything that you see, whether embedded in a robot or not embedded, can be done by AI in one form or another.
Yeah.
And the question is how much human intervention you need. And of course, this is the big deal for regulators and legislators
Absolutely.
like myself, is AI going to be our servant or our master, basically? And that is the key question. If you just allow AI to be autonomous and pretty much invent itself as it goes along, then I think we're going to be in trouble later. What we have to do, and this is this was the subject of the Reith Lectures with Stuart Russell.
Yeah.
It's the subject of Brown Champion's book, Alignment. If you don't align AI with human goals, then you're in trouble. So I would hate to be a doomsayer. I'm, in fact, a big optimist.
Yeah.
That's why we need to create this framework.
Yeah, so recently the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation, which I'm advising on, they produced a survey on public attitudes towards AI. And really, you've spoken about this before, but the role of trust, in I guess, just in terms of not just the technology, but also the institutions and the ecosystem around how this technology is being applied. So, I mean, what's your opinion on public trust and how we can basically address this fundamental question?
Trust is absolutely fundamental, and we had a debate last night about one of the reports that my AI Select Committee put forward in Parliament last night, and it was clear that the key issue is trust. I mean, if you only just have to illustrate that by the difference between the way that GM foods has been dealt with, where there was this huge flurry of negative comment in the media, which led to basically extremely unhelpful regulation and quite unjustified regulation, many people would say, compared to fertilization and embryology technology, where there was proper consultation, the media didn't get overexcited about it, and basically we set up a regulatory system which actually has been incredibly valuable in the field of fertilization and embryology for over 20 years now. So how you actually approach the new technologies and how you build public trust is really, really important. And if we just treat AI as a black box and we don't actually have transparency, explainability, we don't have trust in the way data is being used, then we're in trouble. And, for instance, during the pandemic, there was not a great deal of public trust in how people's data was being used.
Absolutely.
And we had all that problem last year with GP data. Even the person responsible for advising the government on data use in the health area, Professor Ben Goldacre, said that he opted out of the use of his data by the NHS. Now that seems to be an extraordinary thing. So, we mustn't go down that slippery slope of losing public trust, because then you lose the right to use new technology. In the workplace, people are suspicious. In public life, politicians are suspicious. We don't want that. We want to have trusted AI, and that is actually not that difficult to achieve.
Yeah, I think it's important to have responsible innovation in this space, because I absolutely agree with you. If we do lose public trust, I don't think businesses that are trying to innovate in this area are able to really thrive. So basically, let's pick up then on the point you mentioned. I want to follow up and ask how best to regulate, and maybe you can give me some examples of what the UK is doing and compared to, say, EU. Obviously, we know some in the audience know that EU is obviously trying to regulate this area, and then across the Atlantic and other parts of the world. If you want to just give a few examples.
Yes, I think the common theme in our reports, and I think the approach of most trade organizations in the tech area, is not to have overly blanket regulation. I think there is a feeling that actually sector-specific regulation is the approach that one should have.
Yeah.
But even once you've got to sector-specific regulation, what you've got to have is a common set of tools. So, you need standards for different sectors, but at the end of the day, what you're really talking about is looking at the AI life cycle. And Tech UK published something quite useful on this only a few weeks ago, talking about regulating right across the life cycle. So, for instance, you don't just go for risk assessment, because if it's risk assessment, you're making an estimate of roughly, what's going to happen, what the output is at the end of the day. But you haven't really seen it. What you've got to do is look at risk and impact up front. So you've got to make an estimate of actually, what impact that AI application is going to have. And then you've got to add audit, regular audit, because AI is a shapeshifter quite often in terms of the way that, as I say, it learns from experience. And then you've got to add monitoring as well. Absolutely. Throughout, in continuous monitoring, really, to make sure that actually the purpose for which you designed the AI it hasn't gone completely off track because of the nature, the autonomous nature of the AI. So it is different to many other tech applications, which are much more constant, but you need to make sure that it's still fit for the purpose for which you designed it. And, that's why things like ethical design up front and so on are really, really important. But it's not rocket science. What we've got to do is find common ways of agreeing on what kind of standards for risk and impact assessment, etc., are needed. And of course, that's why some of the international work is so important as well.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think it's hard to have a blanket kind of approach to AI regulation. What's your view of the EU's attempts in this area?
Well, of course, the interesting thing is that the EU, they vary between overarching, quite predictive or prescriptive regulation, for instance, in AI, and much less prescriptive regulation in areas such as online safety. So, they do veer between the two. At the moment, I think most people will think that the AIA, the AI Act in the EU, is rather over-prescriptive, because what they're saying is these risks are totally unacceptable from the very start. Now, it is quite difficult to say that about any form of AI, basically. There are all kinds of AI that may look a bit risky, but because the impact is beneficial, you may want to deploy it, and therefore you may, subject to strong risk and impact assessment, strong monitoring, and so on, you may still want to deploy it. So I wouldn't want to rule anything out particularly. Sure. The big issue for us is how much conformity we have to have with EU rules. It's a bit like GDPR. You can afford to diverge a little bit from the data protection laws in the EU in terms of GDPR, but what you can't do is go too far, because then we won't be data adequate. Exactly. We won't be able to share data. We won't be able to use data from the continent, and so on. So, I mean, we've got to get the balance right. So I think we've got to get the principles established. We've got to make sure that we do have a regulatory system, and it may be that particular forms of transparency are also needed, transparency and explainability. What isn't necessary in my view, and there are some technologists who disagree with me, but not that many, it is possible to design transparency into AI. So black boxes are not really necessary anymore nowadays. They may have been in the past, but not so much now, and they don't reduce performance in anything like the way the people said they used to. Yeah, that's my understanding as well. It's a field that moves very quickly, and I think some of the debates about black boxes
that were maybe true a few years ago. The technology has improved, and also, in the area of data protection and privacy, there's now a big focus on privacy-enhancing technologies. So I do think this is, it comes to a point that I want to ask is, basically, technology is evolving so quickly, and obviously, we're both lawyers, and we know that law often struggles to keep up. So would you say that actually, rather than legislating, it's much more appropriate to adopt just principles-based self-regulation, if you may say so, by industry bodies, rather than, policymakers, lawmakers coming in and saying, actually, we need to have this law, or that law. Where does the balance lie?
I think you can't just abdicate responsibility as a politician in that sense. Not if you are concerned about the possible impact of AI on society. I mean, for instance, it may be that businesses just decide that they're going to use AI in a wholly substitutional way, whereas I think many of us want to see it in augmenting employment in the way that the experience of employment is actually better, that tasks are eliminated, the boring tasks, if you like, are eliminated by AI, but nevertheless there is a role for humanity in terms of our creativity and our ability to use technology. That is very important. So I think anybody looking at the future of society has to say, look, we do have a responsibility, but I think it's a top-down, bottom-up issue. I think you've got to come from both directions. I think standards have to be set and agreed by business with agreement of government and standards institute like the BSI, like the IEEE, like ISO and so on. You have to get those standards in place, but then you have to have a relatively thin layer of requirements at the sort of regulatory level. I think the real problem is where they come at you and you're in business and they come at you from every direction, and the whole thing is so damn complicated that you find yourself hiring more compliance officers than you do tech experts. So there's a very important balance, but that public trust, that public license, in a sense, has to be at the forefront as well. So you can't, I'm afraid, a lot of regulation requires doing several things at once. So I don't think there's a simple solution. I don't think we're there yet. I think probably the EU is going to creak at the seams a little bit with the AIA. It's not wholly practical. I think the US is coming towards not quite compulsory risk assessment, but certainly an expectation that certain forms of risk assessment are done. Some of their national institutes are producing some very good work. The White House has got an AI initiative. There's an AI Initiative Act now through Congress. So that we think of the states as being unregulated to some extent. That is no longer going to be the case. So I don't think people can fondly imagine that if only they developed it in the US, went on NASDAQ or something, that everything would be absolutely fine. I think we're all converging, trying to converge on a sensible set of regulation. And that's, of course, why things like the Global Partnership on AI was set up to try and get some sort of convergence.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a few minutes for questions, so I already see lots of hands up. So let me see. I think the gentleman, thanks.
Hi there. You've talked a lot about sort of regulating businesses and checking that they're playing to the rules or playing in a way that sort of is a safe space and responsible way of building. But how do you deal with the likes of hackers and stuff in the AI space? Because I've been reading about how even like food technology and machines that are helping food production are getting hacked and used to sort of for ransoms and such. Is AI, even if you put regulation on businesses, what about people that aren't working within the law? Is there not a massive risk there for AI in the future because of that? If machines do sort of become masters over humans, then it's hugely dangerous, and people with the right power that aren't working towards the regulations, like people outside of those realms, and is there not just a major danger there, or how do you deal with it?
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely right. But one of the key principles, and you'll see this in the OECD principles,
Yeah.
you'll see it in the EU principles, you'll see it on the ones that we put forward in our reports, is that AI should not be used for, human detriment. And cybersecurity and that kind of cyber hacking is, going to be a criminal offence. If it isn't already, as the ways in which AI is used are used for criminal purposes, they will be. I mean, Mimi said that, legislation comes rather slowly, and she's absolutely right. We're only just beginning to grapple with the online harms aspect of algorithms and AI embedded in our social media. Well, if we see AI being used for cybercrime and hacking and so on, which is not covered by existing legislation, then that will, we have to understand it and have to regulate and criminalize accordingly. I would say that quite often there are generic types of crime, theft and fraud and so on, which can be applied. But of course, the big issue is the understanding of enforcement agencies. And, one of the big issues that's being dealt with at the moment is collaboration between regulators. And this is a fantastic initiative, actually, the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum between the FCA, the ICO, the CMA, and Ofcom. Just 4 regulators at the moment. It'll probably expand, but they are collaborating on understanding AI and algorithms and the regulation and enforcement issues involved. Now that, I think, is a very positive move, because we're not reinventing the wheel. We're building up greater understanding of what's needed. And of course, they can then feed back into legislators the more they understand about the issues on the ground. So you're absolutely right, but I'm not pessimistic about our ability to seize that particular bit of the agenda.
Thank you. Given that your parallel with GDPR a moment ago, and obviously AI coming through from the EU side, given we've got Shrem 3 threatened from last week, do you think there's any chance of the AI not just manifesting that in a EU, US, UK, or AUKUS philosophical differential?
So you think there might be a fissure that opens between the EU and the others, so to speak?
As with the tearing down of Safe Harbour post-Shrem 1.
Yes, there's always a danger of that. And of course, as you rightly say, we've seen all this all the real issues with data transfer and the judgments of the European Court of Justice and so on, which seem to get more and more tougher and tougher as time goes on, basically. Although there are stirrings about even reform of GDPR within the European Union, and that may be a way forward. But I agree, there are dangers. And our big danger is if we blithely think that we can get away with very, very light touch regulation over here. And our developers develop AI, and we start applying AI in the UK and then want to use it on the continent within the EU. We may find that we don't conform to their regulation and we're in trouble. So I think we're going to have to keep more than one eye on how the EU enforces and progresses its AI legislation. But, in a sense, we're going to have to do that in so many regulatory areas now. It's an inevitable consequence of Brexit when you've got a market of 450 million people on your doorstep. I mean, we'll have to do that in terms of digital competition.
Yeah.
We'll have to do that in terms of our online safety legislation, which does differ from the Digital Services Act. So I think, I'm afraid we're still going to need lawyers. It's a terrible thing.
All right, well, one last question.
Thank you so much. Dr. Zhu, thank you for such an interesting panel. And Lord Cameron-Jones, thank you for the work you're doing. Richard Foster Fletcher, MKAI, Morality and Knowledge in Artificial Intelligence. AI obviously describes everything and nothing, doesn't it? From a little bit of machine learning on a local database through to supercomputers and the likes of DeepMind and OpenAI. When you're just thinking about these things generally, Lord Clement Jones, what are the complications or challenges of an industry that goes right up to some deep work in some labs that maybe we don't fully understand. Are there different challenges with the likes of Transformers, GPT-3, and the big houses for this?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because, again, we're back to the 1950s with the saying of John McCarthy's, as soon as it works, no one calls it AI anymore. So, you know, the big problem is visibility when it becomes into everyday use. You know, on the one hand, you've got people completely blithely using their phones, you know, giving their data away, being quite happy that there's an algorithm amplifying, you know, some really bad content, you know, all this kind of thing, where in a sense they're blithely ignorant that it's AI at work. On the other hand, you get this kind of, and that's why robots are so damn popular. You see the, you know, the Terminator narrative, which is everywhere, basically, as soon as people start talking about AI and robots. In fact, you know, the headlines after our House of Lords report was that we were trying to stop Terminator robots running rampage, and that's why we were suggesting a regulatory ethical set of principles. You know, you can't win on this stuff. Either there's a degree of ignorance or there's a degree of absolutely unreasonable fear. Now, I think, and this is where I think people like DeepMind are fantastic, because they come up with really positive stories. And, you know, we do need positive stories. We need positive stories about, like AlphaFold, for instance, which is, you know, the discovery of new molecules and how they're constructed. Then we look at the new, only 2 weeks ago, we had this new DeepMind Gatto AI application. Now, it's not artificial general intelligence. It can do 604 functions, apparently, 604 types of different functions, which is extraordinary. Almost like Boris Johnson, you know.
No politics.
You got to allow me a bit of license. You know.
Okay.
So, you know, it's things like that where I think we have to, you know, sell the good stories, basically, about AI, and then people will understand what it's all about. Of course we need regulation, but my gosh, I mean, compared to many, many technologies, it is so much more beneficial if it's used in the right way. You know, I regularly meet AI startups, growth companies, R&D institutes, and so on. And it's very exciting work. But nearly everybody that I come across recognizes the need for ethical application of AI, and that is what actually binds together the artificial intelligence community, in my view.
I'm afraid we're out of time, Tim. I just want to say thank you very much, and thank you, the audience, for such stimulating questions. We have a tea break now, but can you join me in thanking Lord Clement Jones for such an exciting conversation? Thanks very much. Cheers.